Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris.
What if a Muslim was to say to you just now, my little girl cried more at her first haircut than when I cut off her clitoris? What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humor shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me.
What you've just witnessed is what fans and foes alike called a Hitch Slap, that moment when Christopher Hitchens' legendary wit, moral clarity and rhetorical precision combined to leave his opponent not just defeated, but existentially laid bare.
You give me the awful impression, I hate to have to say it, of someone who hasn't read any of the arguments against your position ever.
We just saw an entire room shift in no time at all, from cheery laughter to stunned silence, as Hitchens transformed a joke about child mutilation into evidence for his entire thesis about religion's corruption of human morality. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Shame on you for saying what you just said. Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
Why hello my fellow apes, I hope you are well. Today we're going to dissect one of the most devastating intellectual takedowns in the history of religious debate. See, Christopher Hitchens possessed something that made him the most feared debater of his generation, and it wasn't just his encyclopedic knowledge, his command of language, or incredible charm. It was his unmatched rhetorical precision, the ability to find exactly the right pressure point and apply exactly the right force at exactly the right moment. Now, the rabbi in this exchange, Rabbi Kushner, author of When Bad Things Happen to Good People, was no amateur. Religious leaders at his level, like all seasoned public speakers, know how to work a room. They understand timing, they know when to deploy humour, when to be self-depreciating, how to get an audience on their side. Harold had these skills in spades. You've just seen him use them, turning a serious accusation about genital mutilation into a light-hearted anecdote about haircuts and Nobel Prizes. The audience loved it.
The only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
But even his considerable rhetorical prowess was no match for what Christopher was about to unleash. Now, for context, the exchange we're about to analyse took place during a panel discussion on religion and morality, one of those high-stake intellectual showdowns where reputations are made and destroyed. Hitchens had come armed with God is not great, how religion poisons everything, his blistering atheist manifesto that was setting the bestseller charts on fire.
And religion is our first and worst attempt to find out what's going on. We only bother with it because it was here first.
Harold, already a household name for when bad things happen to good people, stood as the defender of faith. Both men had books to sell, audiences to win, and ideological ground to defend. The full debate sprawled across multiple topics: theodicy, ethics, and the nature of belief. But we're going to zero in on the minutes that became legendary. What started as a softball question about cosmic justice would escalate into one of the most savage intellectual beatdowns ever captured on camera. The kind of exchange that gets clipped, shared, studied, and remembered long after the books have been gathering dust. Such as what we're doing now. Speaking of narratives, an absolutely incredible, as in not credible story recently grabbed my attention. Child with stage 4 cancer deported by ICE, despite being a US citizen. I came across this thanks to Ground News' Blind Spot feature, a brilliant tool on their homepage that reveals stories being dramatically underreported by either the left or the right. This allows me to investigate my blind spot so I can see the complete picture of what's happening in the real world. The coverage breakdown is stunning. 46 news outlets total, but only one from the right. I mean, bro. An American citizen, a child with cancer, gets deported, and virtually the entire right-wing media ecosystem remains silent. So much for Save the Children, huh? You can follow along at ground.news/rationality. The way different outlets frame this tragedy is equally revealing. NBC Chicago, a centrist source with very high factuality, presents it straightforwardly, emphasizing the child's US citizenship and stage 4 cancer diagnosis at the heart of the disturbing story. But the Christian Post, that lone right-wing outlet covering it, takes, well, an incredible angle. Their headline reads, ICE unlawfully deported child with stage 4 kidney cancer, with unlawful placed in skeptical quotation marks, subtly questioning whether any actual wrongdoing occurred. Same tragic event, completely different narrative. This is precisely why ground news has become so indispensable. Their blind spot feature ensures that I'm not just seeing what my usual sources want me to see, I'm discovering the stories entire segments of the media choose to ignore. In today's polarized media landscape, these tools are essential for understanding the complete picture. Get 40% off their Vantage plan at ground.news/rationality or scan this QR code. Your subscription not only gives you balanced coverage, but also supports this channel. For anyone serious about escaping their echo chamber, Ground News delivers the full story, including the parts others don't want you to see. Thanks. Let's watch the master at work, shall we?
Rabbi, I suppose you've heard this question before. I think it's for the panel. Why do good things happen to bad people?
Why do bad people get away with murder? I have lost track of how many people have urged me to write a book by that title. And my response is, who would buy it? Who would you give it as a present to?
The rabbi starts strong in the eyes of the audience. Rather than simply answering the question, he transforms it into a comedy routine. His question, who would you give it to as a present, is masterful rapport building, getting them laughing with him before any serious debate on the topic begins. He's establishing himself as the likable, self-depreciating religious figure who can take a joke. And this isn't accidental. It will serve as armor when things get heated later.
And my response is, who would buy it? Who would you give it as a present to?
Well, it's too late for Mr. Madoff now, but he would have liked it a year ago.
And here's Christopher, immediately recognizing the humor gambit and countering with his own joke about Bernie Madoff. A perfectly timed topical reference, as the largest Ponzi scheme in history had just exploded into headlines a month earlier. Christopher refuses to cede the comedic high ground. This is intellectual combat, and controlling the room's laughter is part of the arsenal.
I would say bottom line is, yeah, it's a very disturbing phenomenon. Most of the time, I think, you don't really get away with anything in this world. You pay for everything you take in this world in one currency or another.
Quite the pivot from comedian to reflective teacher, right? Since he's secured audience goodwill, Harold shifts into serious moral philosophy with his "you pay for everything karmic justice" argument. But did you notice the hedging? Most of the time, I think.
Most of the time, I think.
Those qualifications are undermining the universality of his argument before anyone else can. But let's examine what Harold's really doing here. His karmic justice position is a perfect illustration of an unfalsifiable claim, when someone makes an assertion that cannot be proven false because it's too vague or lacks measurable criteria. Think of it this way: claiming that bad people suffer internally even if we can't see it is like saying that your family is cursed, but curses work in mysterious ways that you can't predict. Any misfortune is proof of the curse. Any success, well, the curse hasn't struck yet. There's no way to test or disprove it because the rules are deliberately vague. This applies to Harold's claim that people don't get away with anything. If someone faces consequences, well, that's proof, right? But if they don't, well, they will eventually. It's a claim that can never be wrong because it's designed that way. It's a claim backed by nothing but intuition. Yet, it feels true enough that the audience instinctively agree, thinking of their own examples where karma seemed to work.
The Bernard Madoffs, even if he had not been caught, would have missed out on much of what it means to be a human being. The guy who cheats on his wife and doesn't get caught and thinks he's really clever and he's pulled it off will never know what it really feels like to invest all of your love in a single relationship. You pay for everything you take in life in one currency or another, and sometimes when the bill comes due, you go back and wish you'd played it differently.
The parade of unprovable punishments continues, and notice how the rabbi deftly hijacks Christopher's Madoff reference to reinforce his point. Convenient, isn't it, that this supposed suffering is so utterly unprovable? Harold is doubling down on his unfalsifiable claims. What does he actually mean? Well, his sleight of hand lies in the vagueness itself. By never specifying what this missing out entails, he invites each listener to project their own moral intuitions onto the argument, letting them imagine whatever inner torment best satisfies their sense of justice. The adultery example is especially shrewd, tapping into a universal theme of love and betrayal. It makes the abstract seem intimate and personal. But look closely at the structure of his claim. The cheater could, in reality, be blissfully happy, fulfilled, and utterly untroubled, and Harold's framework would insist, but he's secretly suffering even if he doesn't know it. That's not reasoning, that's narrative armour, built to repel evidence. Anyhow, with that, the rabbi rests his case, the audience apparently satisfied with his assertion that the universe runs on invisible karmic justice. The third panellist, Reverend Peter Gomes, offers his own theological perspective, but since it adds little to the central confrontation that we're analysing, we're going to skip to where Christopher drops his rhetorical bomb.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, there are things that a morally normal, even a very morally average or mediocre person would not unprompted do. For example, hold down their daughter at the age of 6, tear off her underwear and cut her genitalia with a sharp stone.
And here it is, the moment the room's temperature changed. Christopher just shattered the comfortable atmosphere that Harold had fostered. He's forcing visceral, graphic imagery on an audience that's laughing. Notice the strategic specificity. 6. Tear off her underwear. Sharp stone.
Tear off her underwear and cut her genitalia with a sharp stone.
These are not casual word choices. These are what rhetoricians call concrete language, specific tangible details that prevent the audience from retreating into comfortable philosophical abstractions. You can't philosophize your way out of that image. Christopher has seized the moral high ground as defender of innocent children, and the specificity makes it impossible to look away. This isn't an easy room to flip. Harold had stacked the deck with warmth and humour, but Christopher's moral urgency cut straight through it.
For example, hold down their daughter at the age of 6, tear off her underwear and cut her genitalia with a sharp stone. They wouldn't do that if they didn't think God was telling them to do it, or the mullahs, or if it's a boy, the rabbis weren't telling them to do it.
The trap has sprung shut. Most likely, almost certainly, Christopher was always heading here, using female genital mutilation as the entry point precisely because it makes the audience recoil from it. Then pivoting to, if it's a boy, the rabbis, to catch Harold in the exact same moral framework.
If it's a boy, the rabbis weren't telling them to do it.
It is a phenomenal move. No longer is this an abstract theological debate. It's very real, and the inclusive condemnation, mullahs, rabbis, prevents any deflection to those other religions. But here's Christopher's real genius. He's taken this warm, self-depreciating man the audience has been charmed by and reframed him as someone who advocates for cutting children's genitals. The same Harold who just had them laughing with his gentle humour is now implicitly cast as someone who directs parents to effectively hold down their sons and permanently slice off a part of their body. A body apparently created in God's own image, no less. In doing this, Christopher has weaponized the audience's affection against its object. They can't defend Harold without defending child cutting.
They wouldn't do that if they didn't think God was telling them to do it, or the mullahs, or if it's a boy, the rabbis weren't telling them to do it. One of the reasons why I have the lurid subtitle I do of my book, that Religion is a Poison, is that it makes ordinary moral people, compels them, forces them, in some cases orders them, to do disgusting, wicked, unforgivable things.
Listen to that escalating language. Compels, forces, orders. It's a rhetorical crescendo building to inevitable violence and unforgivable,
wicked, unforgivable things.
That's absolutist framing that removes any possibility of redemption or excuse. He's building his case brick by brick.
There's no expiation for the generations of misery and suffering that religion has inflicted in this way and continues to inflict, and I still haven't heard enough apology for it.
A subtle but devastating escalation. By invoking generations, Christopher expands the charge from a single act to a historical indictment. And then comes the dagger.
And I still haven't heard enough apology for it.
This isn't mere confrontation. It's a trap. Harold must either defend the indefensible or repudiate his own tradition. And Christopher knows full well how religious institutions respond when accused of harm. Deny, minimize, deflect, but never apologize, because apology means culpability, and culpability means liability. He's demanding the one thing that Harold cannot and will not give.
There's no expiation for the generations of misery and suffering that religion has inflicted in this way and continues to inflict, and I still haven't heard enough apology for it.
Rabbi, you want to add something?
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris.
Oh, this is excruciating to watch. Harold walks straight into the slap, attempting to diffuse Christopher's graphic imagery by comparing religious genital mutilation to a haircut. This minimization through humour might well work at a dinner party, but in this arena, with how much Christopher has flipped the room, it's a terrible mistake. In fact, Harold's comparison doesn't just fall flat, it's an embodiment of the exact religious moral blindness Christopher was hunting for. Notice the linguistic dodge too. Harold won't even engage with genital mutilation, pivoting instead to the sanitized religious term bris.
My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris.
As if changing the label changes the act. He's desperately trying to pull the audience back into the safe, light-hearted atmosphere that he built earlier, but it's too late. Now, to get analytical, Harold has served up a false analogy fallacy when someone assumes that because two things are alike in one respect, they must be alike in another. He's comparing permanent surgical amputation to a cosmetic trim. The gulf is staggering. Foreskin tissue doesn't grow back like hair, and hair doesn't contain 20,000 specialized nerve endings. And given that Christopher just described children being pinned down for the procedure, this breezy dismissal doesn't just fall flat, it borders on sociopathic. Making this worse, it's also an anecdotal evidence fallacy, when someone uses personal testimony as evidence instead of relying on falsifiable data. It's the same logic as smoking isn't harmful because my grandfather smoked a pack a day and he lived to 95. Harold leans on a single data point, his own son's reaction, as if personal testimony trumps empirical reality. A child crying less at one moment tells us nothing about consent, ethics, or long-term harm. The actual evidence is devastating. A 1997 study in The Lancet found that circumcised infants displayed dramatically heightened pain responses to vaccinations months later. 136% more facial pain response compared to 77% in intact boys. In other words, the trauma literally rewired their nervous systems. A 2020 Frontiers in Pediatrics review confirmed it. Untreated pain in early life permanently alters how the brain processes pain. Even the American Academy of Pediatrics, hardly a radical anti-circumcision group, has recommended the use of analgesia since 1999. Why? Because for decades, doctors performed this surgery with no pain relief whatsoever, clinging to the medical myth that newborns can't feel pain. In reality, they were torturing infants. Ritualized harm, reinforced by religious ignorance, repackaged as medical wisdom.
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris. And statistically...
You weren't doing it right then.
His disgust is unmistakable. The audience chuckles at Harold's haircut line, but Christopher's response reveals he's already morally repulsed by the comparison. While this is packaged as sardonic wit, it's actually barely contained outrage. He is annoyed. He's watching a religious leader, a supposedly moral man, make light of infant genital cutting, and Christopher can't pretend to find it amusing.
You weren't doing it right then.
The line lands like a slap, reminding everyone that they're laughing about mutilating children.
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
Harold isn't giving up. Desperate to claw back control of the tone, he reaches for a line straight from the apologetics playbook, the kind of quip that he's likely have used dozens of times when challenged on circumcision in the past. And for a moment, it works. He is skilled at this. The audience is laughing along.
It increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
But let's think about what he's just done. He tried to launder a moral claim through a feel-good statistic off-cited list that claim a disproportionately high share of laureates are Jewish. It's clear he's saying this tongue-in-cheek, but this demonstrates two fallacies. First, the appeal to consequences, when someone argues that something is true or justified because it has a positive outcome. It's like saying that censorship is justified because it keeps society peaceful. Harold is doing the same move, implying that circumcision must be acceptable because it supposedly produces Nobel Prize winners. That's not evidence of moral legitimacy, it's wishful thinking dressed up as logic. Second, we have the false cause fallacy, when someone assumes causation from correlation. Think of someone claiming that wearing glasses causes intelligence because most scientists wear them, ignoring that people who read extensively tend to need glasses. Harold's logic is identical. He treats the correlation between circumcision and Nobel Prizes as causation, as if slicing infants somehow fuels intellectual achievement. In reality, the correlation exists because of countless other factors: cultural emphasis on education, historical circumstances, socio-economic opportunities, not because a surgeon's knife makes a child smarter.
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humour in that way.
What a delivery! You see, what's devastating here isn't Christopher's anger, but rather his restraint. His words, "I can't find this a subject of humour," comes across as gentle, even differential, yet it lands with moral indictment. And indeed, that's what it is. He's not shouting or condemning, he's simply quietly refusing to participate in the audience's laughter, and that refusal forces everyone to hear what they're actually applauding: the mutilation of infants. Compounding the point is his deliberate word stack: compulsory, mutilation, genitals, children.
Compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humour in that way.
Each term strips away euphemism and cultural comfort. No more bris, no more covenant, no more religious poetry, just the raw, ugly reality of what's being done. But crucially, he's not calling the audience monsters, he's simply refusing to let them distance themselves from what they're actually laughing about. They are, per his thesis, otherwise decent people, the kind who would call Child Protective Services if they saw a stranger piercing a baby's ear at home. And yet, here they are, giggling about permanent genital surgery. The cognitive dissonance is staggering, and Christopher just made them feel it.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humour in that way, or flippancy in that way. Maimonides says very plainly that it's designed to repress sexual pleasure, to deprive us, a male child as far as possible of the opportunity of that.
This follow-up is pure strategic brilliance. Christopher quotes Maimonides. For those unfamiliar, this is like quoting Aquinas to a Catholic priest or Martin Luther to a Protestant minister. Maimonides isn't just some Jewish philosopher, he's the Jewish philosopher, the towering intellectual authority that rabbis have relied on for nearly 1,000 years to interpret Jewish law and theology. So when Christopher reaches for the Guide for the Perplexed, where Maimonides explicitly states that an objective of circumcision is to limit sexual intercourse by weakening sexual excitement, even citing a ridiculous rabbinic line that a woman finds it hard to separate from an uncircumcised partner, he's essentially forcing Harold to argue against his own tradition's Einstein. Harold knows this text. Every rabbi knows this text. You can't get more authoritative in Jewish philosophy. There's even an old Jewish saying: from Moses of the Torah to Moses Maimonides, there was none like Moses. That is how untouchable his authority is in Jewish thought. So Christopher has created an impossible bind. Either Harold defends Maimonides' explicit statement that circumcision is designed to damage sexual pleasure, or he rejects Judaism's greatest philosophical authority. Harold just spent minutes joking about how circumcision is harmless, and Christopher just proved, using Harold's own tradition, that harm was always the intent.
Maimonides says very plainly that it's designed to repress sexual pleasure, to deprive us, a male child as far as possible, of the opportunity of that. The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment.
Now, Christopher is dissecting the procedure itself with surgical precision, with the technical specificity, full excision,
The full excision,
mandatory covenantal,
the full mandatory covenant.
demonstrating deep knowledge while maintaining clinical distance. He knows the difference between the modern hospital version and the biblical Brit Miller, where the entire foreskin must be torn and peeled away from the glands. He lists multiple harms in succession: pain, trauma, sexual dysfunction, death risk. Each consequence builds on the last, creating a mounting case that is catastrophically harmful on multiple levels.
The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment. We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States, boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice.
Notice the shift. Christopher moves from theology to raw data, from Maimonides to moral statistics. His repetition, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, isn't stuttering, it's rhythmic emphasis, hammering home the scale of the carnage.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Back when this barbarism was performed without anaesthetic, tearing the foreskin away with fingernails and sucking the wound with the mouth, death was routine. But even today, with all our medical advances, the carnage continues. A 2010 Thymos Journal study estimated around 117 circumcision-related deaths every year in the US alone. Think about that. 117 dead baby boys every year sacrificed for tradition. A 2014 study found that the risk of adverse events was approximately 0.4% overall. That's nearly 1 in 200 boys subjected to this completely unnecessary procedure suffering serious complications, some fatal. Oh, and you know that I said that back then they used to use an oral suction method? Horrifyingly, it isn't extinct. Medzitsa Bipa still happens today among ultra-Orthodox. Yes, you heard that correctly. After cutting and tearing a baby's penis with a blade and fingernail, an adult man puts his mouth on the bleeding wound and sucks. This is still practiced, and it has killed countless babies through herpes transmission. So many, in fact, that New York City was forced to require informed consent. That's informed consent for letting someone give your baby herpes through oral genital contact. In the 21st century.
As a result of this disgusting practice.
By returning to the phrase disgusting practice after unloading this avalanche of horror, he fuses empirical evidence with moral outrage, leaving absolutely no room for retreat to tradition or euphemism.
We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States, boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice. That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humour shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me.
And there's the Hitch Slap, reverberating through the hall. Christopher delivers a tactical compliment that makes the blow all the more devastating. A person as humane as yourself.
A person as humane as yourself.
By first affirming Harold's decency, he sharpens the contrast, showing how religion has twisted that very decency into complicity. Then the kill shot. You've just proved my point for me. It isn't mere rhetoric. Harold has literally become Exhibit A in Christopher's thesis.
You've just proved my point for me.
The warm, gentle rabbi who moments ago had the audience laughing with his self-depreciating charm now stands exposed as a man who joked about mutilating children. The transformation is total. Case closed.
Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me. Shame on you for saying what you just said. Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
And now the gloves are completely off. Tactical argument has given way to righteous indignation. The repetition of shame on you deliberately echoes the cadence of biblical prophecy, the very language Harold would use from the pulpit. And by making it about your own son, Christopher transforms abstract debate into intimate betrayal. Harold is no longer just a rabbi defending tradition. He's a father who laughed about his own child's irreversible mutilation.
Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
That final "my God," an atheist invoking religious exclamation, lands as a perfect ironic slap.
Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
Let's move on.
The moderator senses the atmosphere curdling. What began as light-hearted banter has become a public execution. So she steps in before Harold's dignity is completely annihilated.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's.
And Harold seizes the lifeline like a drowning man, not just from desperation, but strategy. He knows that he's been eviscerated in front of the crowd, and his best chance now is to look magnanimous, to let Christopher appear as if he's the aggressor, who pressed too far.
Yes, let's.
If he can play the gracious adult, maybe the audience will remember his composure under fire, instead of his jokes about mutilating babies. So he nods, yes, let's move on, hoping to bank on their discomfort.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's.
What next? Cutting the labia of little girls. At least Judaism doesn't do that.
Christopher, however, refuses to let Harold retreat into civility. Instead, he pivots to female genital mutilation, an atrocity that Western audiences instantly recognize as barbaric. It's a brutal escalation, doubling the moral pressure. Suddenly, the same crowd that would call child protection services if a neighbour cut their daughter's genitals is confronted with the fact that they've just spent 5 minutes laughing at jokes about boys enduring the same.
It increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
The cognitive dissonance is staggering, and Christopher forces them to feel every ounce of it.
What next? Cutting the labia of little girls. At least Judaism doesn't do that.
In this moment, the audience, along with the moderator, became Exhibit B in his thesis. Decent people laughing at barbarism simply because religion told them that it was holy.
This is a question.
What if a Muslim was to say to you just now, my little girl cried more at her first haircut than when I cut off her clitoris? What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
And now that Christopher's got the audience on the ropes, he deliberately makes it visceral. Cut off her clitoris. So not female circumcision, not some euphemistic medical term, but the raw anatomic reality.
Than when I cut off her clitoris.
The crowd recoils at the words alone, and that is the point. They're horrified by female genital mutilation, even as they've just been laughing at jokes about the same violence inflicted on boys. Christopher's follow-up question, what would you think of me if I were to say such a disgusting thing, forces them to apply their genuine revulsion to what they've just been laughing at. And the silence is deafening.
What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
Well,
Remember, we are not talking about detail here. We're talking about whether religion makes people behave better or not.
Refusing to let the silence linger, Christopher moves in for the kill. The rabbi came here to argue that faith improves human behavior. Instead, he spent the evening laughing about mutilating his own son, while hundreds of religious people applauded. Case closed. Thesis proven. Religion poisons everything.
let's
And
give the
I
rabbi a
think
chance. I wanted to
deserve
move
a-
on, but let's give the rabbi a chance to respond to what you
Christ.
said, because it got pretty personal here.
And here comes the predictable protection of the perpetrator. The moderator's tone policing, it's got pretty personal, is breathtaking in its perversity.
It got pretty personal here.
She's more disgusted by Christopher naming the cruelty than by Harold joking about doing it. One man giggled about taking a knife to an infant's genitals, the other called it disgusting. Yet somehow, Christopher is cast as the aggressor. This is how religious cruelty endures. The culture protects those who practice it and shuns those who call it out, and the bias is complicit.
Again, my experience in my own son, my own grandson, hundreds of congregants, has been that it's not nothing like what you're talking about, and that for whatever reason that this has become an issue for you, I just think is excessive.
Harold scrambling, throwing everything at the wall. First, he retreats to his old defense, personal experience as authority, his son, his grandson, hundreds of congregants, as if anecdotes outweigh documented deaths and Maimonides' own writing. But he knows this isn't enough. It failed before, so he pivots to character assassination.
For whatever reason that this has become an issue for you,
Drips with insinuation, implying that Christopher has psychological baggage, that maybe something happened to him, that his argument is born from personal damage, not moral clarity.
I just think is excessive.
And he seals it by claiming Christopher excessive, framing righteous outrage as irrational extremism. This is a pretty clear-cut ad hominem fallacy, when someone attacks the person making the argument rather than the argument itself. It's like dismissing a climate scientist with "you only care about global warming because you want research grants," as if their funding sources invalidate the melting ice caps. It's dismissive, it's irrelevant, and transparently evasive. At this point, Harold has nothing left but personal testimony and psychological speculation. That's all he's got. His well is dry.
For whatever reason that this has become an issue for you, I just think is excessive.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
That I'm more
There's
personally
an undertone of innuendo to this. Let's bring it on.
Christopher catches the slur mid-flight. He won't let Harold retreat into vague insinuation. If you're going to suggest something unseemly, then have the courage to say it outright. And his challenge, let's bring it on, is pure rhetorical dominance. He's not just prepared for a personal attack, he's daring Harold to make it explicit.
There's an undertone of innuendo to this. Let's bring it on.
Put your accusation on the table where it can be dissected, or admit that you've got nothing. It's masterful debate control. Christopher blocks the conversation from drifting into psychoanalysis and innuendo. There's no safe harbour for smears, and the audience can see it.
There's an undertone of innuendo to this. Let's bring it on.
No, there's no innuendo there. What I'm saying is...
Impressive, isn't it? The moment Christopher presses him, Harold immediately retreats. He won't stand by his insinuation.
No, there's no innuendo there. What I'm saying is...
And here's the thing. Had Christopher let it slide, Harold almost certainly wouldn't have retracted. He would have left the audience with the impression that Christopher was being erratic, unstable even. So by calling it out, Christopher denied him that cover.
No, there's no innuendo there. What I'm saying is...
Sure.
I've lived through this personally and...
You've inflicted it, is what you're saying.
Once again, Christopher's linguistic judo shines. Harold reaches for the minimization lived through, casting himself as a mere bystander.
I've lived through this.
But Christopher instantly flips it. Inflicted. He's utterly refusing to let Harold blur his role with soft language.
You've inflicted it, is what you're saying.
You didn't just watch the ritual, Harold. You haven't lived through anything. You've inflicted permanent genital mutilation on innocent babies who couldn't consent, couldn't escape, couldn't even speak.
You've inflicted it, is what you're saying.
I've been what?
You've inflicted it, or officiated at it, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Notice the rhythm. Christopher delivers the first strike, inflicted, then softens the follow-up with officiated. But the damage is already done.
I've been what?
Harold's panic stalling, I've been what, is a clumsy attempt to buy time, as if he didn't hear perfectly well. But Christopher bulldozes through, keeping the pressure on.
You've inflicted it, or officiated at it, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, officiated, yes. Inflicted, no. Forget Maimonides. Maimonides has his hang-ups.
As expected, Harold clings to officiated instead of inflicted, as if ritual somehow erases moral guilt. But then comes the more shocking blunder. Knowing that he can't counter the Maimonides citation, he dismisses his teachings entirely as a man with psychological hang-ups.
Forget Maimonides. Maimonides has his hang-ups.
Stunning, isn't it? All of a sudden, the philosophical giant of Jewish thought, the man who reconciled Aristotelian philosophy with Torah, whose works have guided Jewish law for 8 centuries, apparently he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Maimonides has his hang-ups.
It's the equivalent of a Catholic priest shrugging off Aquinas as a crank on salvation, or a Muslim imam waving away Ibn Rushd as just being in a mood when he wrote about metaphysics. It's an extraordinary retreat from tradition, and it reeks of desperation.
Forget Maimonides. Maimonides has his hang-ups about that.
I should forget Maimonides. Since when do you say that?
Christopher's incredulity is likely part genuine, but it is no doubt at least part feigned. He knows how seismic this admission is. For a rabbi to casually dismiss Maimonides is nothing short of heretical, and Christopher won't let Harold wave it away with a breezy "forget him."
I should forget Maimonides. Since when do you say that?
So he presses. Why? On what grounds? because he knows that Harold has no coherent answer, and worse, he knows that any methodology offered for rejecting this Maimonides teaching could be applied to countless other doctrines. It's a subtle yet devastating move in which Christopher isn't just defending his citation, but setting a trap that exposes the arbitrary way that religious authorities pick and choose their own tradition.
I should forget Maimonides. Since when do you say that?
Because on issues of sexuality, Maimonides has some very medieval ideas.
Harold's dismissal is particularly rich, given that Orthodox Judaism still follows Maimonides' sexual laws to the letter. His rulings on ritual purity, marital relations, and sexual conduct remain authoritative across Orthodox communities. So Harold isn't rejecting Maimonides on sexuality at large, he's cherry-picking one inconvenient passage about circumcision while happily keeping the rest. That's not consistency, it's intellectual dishonesty, or at best, incompetency.
Maimonides has some very medieval ideas.
And as for him calling Maimonides medieval, that's laughable. This was a physician who fused Aristotelian philosophy with Jewish law, who championed rational inquiry over blind faith, who even argued women could serve as prophets, positions more progressive, by the way, than most modern Jewish institutions.
Maimonides has some very medieval ideas.
Remember, Orthodox Judaism still doesn't allow female rabbis, and conservative Judaism only began ordaining women in 1985. But sure, Rabbi, tell us more about how backwards this medieval thinker was.
Because on issues of sexuality, Maimonides has some very medieval ideas. I ran across the line in your book that Orthodox Jews have sex through a hole in a bedsheet. Do you know Orthodox Jews who told you they have sex that way?
What in God's name is this? We've gone from debating infant genital mutilation to bedsheets. This is a red herring when someone diverts attention from an issue at hand by introducing an irrelevant topic. And the trick of a good red herring is that it sounds relevant at first. For example, imagine a politician pressed on rising unemployment who responds with, well, what about the increase in high school graduation rates? It feels adjacent, but it's irrelevant. The topic hasn't been addressed. That's exactly what Harold is doing. He's dragging the room into a tangent that sounds relevant, but dodges the actual accusation.
I should forget Maimonides. Since when do you say that?
I ran across the line in your book that Orthodox Jews have sex through a hole in a bedsheet. Do you know Orthodox Jews who told you they have sex that way?
Harold has been utterly humiliated, lost the room, and his own religious authority has been turned against him. Now he's desperately grasping at some stray line from Christopher's book to discredit him personally. The desperation is palpable. He seizes on anything to escape the beating that he's taking.
Do you know Orthodox Jews who told you they have sex that way?
No. I say it is said of Orthodox Jews that they may do that.
All right, gentlemen, I'm sorry to break this up.
That's a Reformed Jewish rumor about Orthodox.
We have a lot of...
Christopher looks momentarily baffled by this strange tangent, but even off balance, he immediately corrects Harold's misrepresentation. He never claimed this to be a fact. He was reporting what Reformed Jews say about Orthodox Jews, an intra-Jewish cultural rumor. Hence, Harold just added strawman to his growing collection of fallacies, attacking a claim Christopher never actually made.
That's a Reformed Jewish rumor about Orthodox.
We have a lot of questions from the audience, and I want to give others a chance.
At last, the moderator steps in to stop the train wreck, recognizing that this has turned from a debate into demolition. She's watching a man's intellectual credibility disintegrate in real time, and decides that enough is enough. The mercy killing has arrived.
We have a lot of questions from the audience, and I want to give others a chance.
Genital mutilation is no joke.
But true to form, Christopher seizes the final word, dragging the discussion back to the moral core. All of Harold's deflections, all of the audience's nervous laughter, all of the moderator's appeal to civility, none of it changes the reality that infants are being cut, scarred, and even killed in the name of religion. He won't let anyone forget it. Genital mutilation is no joke.
Genital mutilation is no joke.
Alright, that was intense. Let's wrap up. What we've just analysed is something far more than a perfect argument or rhetorical knockout. It's a thesis proving itself in real time. Far from simply arguing that religion poisons moral judgment, Christopher made Harold demonstrate it live, in front of hundreds of people and millions online. Harold Kushner, by all accounts a thoughtful, compassionate man who dedicated his life to helping people through grief, sat on that stage and made genital mutilation into a punchline.
The only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
The audience laughed. The moderator protected him when things got uncomfortable.
Christ. Because it got pretty personal here.
And when Christopher refused to let them look away from what they're laughing at, he became the villain for spoiling the fun.
We have a lot of questions from the audience, and I want to give others a chance.
This is the poison at work. Religion doesn't turn people into monsters, it blinds them. It creates moral dead zones where even the most unnecessary harms can be wrapped in tradition, shielded by euphemism, and celebrated as holy. Put Harold on stage to defend his faith, and suddenly he's comparing irreversible genital mutilation to a haircut.
My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris.
He leans on anecdotes over evidence.
In my own son, my own grandson,
he waves off Maimonides, the towering philosopher of his own tradition, as a crank with hang-ups.
Forget Maimonides. Maimonides has his hang-ups.
And when intellectually cornered, he insinuated Christopher has some personal problem.
For whatever reason that this has become an issue for you.
Crucially, notice that Christopher didn't call Harold evil. No, to the contrary, he called him humane. That is what makes this thesis so damning. This wasn't and isn't about bad people doing bad things. It's about good people so intoxicated on religious tradition that they laugh about mutilating babies, then get offended when someone points out the horror.
That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humour shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me.
That, my fellow apes, was the power of the Hitch Slap. Now, some of you will have noticed that I've been flashing this Hitch Slap card throughout the video. That's because I was fortunate enough to get permission from Christopher's widow, Carol Blue, after he passed away, to use his likeness in my game, Debunked. And of course, it's the most powerful card in the deck. There could be no substitute. Those of you who have followed me for years will know that Christopher profoundly shaped me, and even as I grow older and I get grey hairs, I still have so much to learn from him. But I don't think I'm alone. I think that many of us are standing in his shadow, or, if I might be so bold, standing on his shoulders.